Sergeant Major James Richardson adjusted his uniform one last time before stepping into the busy airport terminal. The morning sun streamed through the glass windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. At 42 years old, James had spent nearly 2 decades serving in the British Army's elite Coldstream Guards. His chest bore the distinctive purple and bronze ribbon of the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor for exceptional bravery in the face of enemy action. The medal had been earned 3 years earlier during a fierce battle in Afghanistan. James had single-handedly rescued 12 wounded soldiers from a burning building while under heavy enemy fire. The story had made headlines across Britain, and the Queen herself had presented him with the honor at Buckingham Palace. Despite the recognition, James remained humble and dedicated to his duty protecting the royal family. Today was different from his usual assignments. James was traveling to Edinburgh for a special ceremony where he would be honored alongside other Victoria Cross recipients. The Royal Guard had arranged for him to fly business class, a rare treat that he was quietly looking forward to. The flight was scheduled for 10:30 a.m., and James arrived at the airport 2 hours early, as was his military habit. At the check-in counter, James presented his ticket and military identification. The airline employee, a young woman named Sarah, looked at his documents with a professional smile. However, when she checked her computer screen, her expression changed dramatically. She frowned and began typing frantically, her fingers clicking rapidly across the keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah said, avoiding eye contact. "There seems to be an issue with your booking. We've had to make some last-minute changes due to aircraft maintenance problems." James felt a knot forming in his stomach. "What kind of changes?" he asked politely, maintaining his military composure despite the growing concern. "Well, we've had to downgrade several passengers from business class to economy," Sarah explained, still not meeting his gaze. "Unfortunately, your seat is one of them. We can offer you a middle seat in the back of the plane, row 43. James stood silent for a moment, processing what he had just heard. The Victoria Cross on his uniform seemed to weigh heavier on his chest. He had traveled extensively during his military career, often in far worse conditions than a cramped airplane seat. But this wasn't about comfort. It was about respect and the principle behind the decision. "I understand there are maintenance issues," James said calmly. "But may I ask what criteria were used to determine which passengers would be downgraded?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. She glanced around nervously, as if looking for support from her colleagues. "The computer system automatically selects passengers based on various factors," she replied vaguely. "Such as?" James pressed gently, his years of military training helping him remain patient despite the frustrating situation. "Well, things like frequent flyer status, ticket price, and other considerations," Sarah stammered. James noticed that other passengers were beginning to gather around, listening to the conversation. An elderly gentleman in an expensive suit approached the counter next to him and was immediately upgraded to first class without any mention of maintenance issues. A well-dressed businesswoman received the same treatment moments later. The reality of the situation became clear to James. The airline wasn't experiencing random maintenance problems that required downgrades. They were selectively choosing certain passengers to move to economy class, and apparently, his military service and Victoria Cross meant nothing to their decision-making process. "I see," James said quietly. His voice remained steady, but those who knew him well would have recognized the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated his growing frustration. Behind him, a middle-aged man who had overheard the conversation stepped forward. "Excuse me," the man said to Sarah. "Did I hear correctly that you're downgrading this soldier? Do you see that medal on his uniform?" Sarah glanced nervously at James's Victoria Cross, but remained silent. The man behind James continued, his voice rising slightly. "That's the Victoria Cross, young lady. This man is a war hero." More passengers began to take notice of the commotion. A small crowd was forming around the check-in counter, and James could feel all eyes on him. This was exactly the kind of attention he had always tried to avoid. Military personnel were taught to handle such situations with dignity and professionalism, regardless of how they were treated. "It's all right," James said to the concerned passenger behind him. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." But the man wasn't satisfied. "No, it's not all right. This is disgraceful treatment of someone who has served our country with such distinction." Sarah's supervisor, a stern-looking man in his 50s named Mr. Davidson, appeared at the counter after being summoned by another employee. He looked at the growing crowd with obvious annoyance. "What seems to be the problem here?" Mr. Davidson asked brusquely. Sarah quickly explained the situation while James stood quietly, maintaining his military bearing despite the embarrassing circumstances. Mr. Davidson listened with a blank expression, occasionally glancing at James's uniform and medals. When Sarah finished her explanation, Mr. Davidson turned to James with what appeared to be practiced indifference. "Sir, I understand your disappointment, but airline operations sometimes require difficult decisions. We have offered you alternative seating, and that's the best we can do under the circumstances." The crowd around the counter had grown larger, and several passengers were now openly expressing their outrage at the airline's treatment of the decorated soldier. Someone had begun recording the interaction with their phone, though James hadn't noticed. "This is unacceptable," declared an elderly woman with a distinct Scottish accent. "How dare you treat a Victoria Cross recipient this way?" Mr. Davidson's face reddened slightly. "Ma'am, we appreciate everyone's service, but airline policies apply to all passengers equally." "Equally?" scoffed the businessman who had been upgraded to first class just minutes earlier. "I just watched you upgrade passengers who haven't done a fraction of what this man has done for our country." James felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every instinct told him to accept the situation gracefully and move on, as he had been trained to do throughout his military career. But something about this particular incident felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about how society treated its veterans and what values truly mattered. The situation was spiraling beyond what anyone at the check-in counter had expected. What had started as a routine passenger downgrade was becoming a public relations disaster for the airline, with dozens of witnesses and at least one person recording everything. James took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. It was a direct line that had been given to him after receiving the Victoria Cross, a number he had never used but had been told was available if he ever faced any serious problems. The contact was labeled simply, "Palace, Emergency." As James prepared to make the call that would set extraordinary events in motion, neither he nor anyone else at the airport could have imagined how far the consequences of this moment would reach, or how a single phone call would eventually reach the ears of King Charles himself. James stepped away from the crowded check-in counter, his phone pressed to his ear as it rang once, twice, 3 times. The noise of the busy terminal seemed to fade into the background as he waited for someone to answer. He had never imagined he would need to use this number, but the situation had escalated beyond anything he could handle through normal channels. "Royal Household Emergency Line, this is Margaret speaking. How may I assist you?" came a crisp, professional voice. "This is Sergeant Major James Richardson, Coldstream Guards, Victoria Cross recipient. I'm calling because I'm experiencing what I believe to be discriminatory treatment that's creating a public incident," James said quietly, trying to keep his voice low despite the chaos around him. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Sergeant Major Richardson, yes, I have your details here. Can you please describe what's happening?" James explained the situation clearly and concisely, as he had been trained to do in military briefings. He described the airline's actions, the growing crowd of angry passengers, and the fact that someone was recording the entire incident. "I see," Margaret replied, her tone becoming more serious. "Sergeant Major, this is exactly the type of situation this line was established to handle. Please hold the line while I connect you to the appropriate office." Within seconds, James heard a new voice on the phone. "Sergeant Major Richardson, this is Colonel Hartwell, Private Secretary to His Majesty. I understand you're facing some difficulties?" James quickly repeated his explanation, adding details about the airline staff's attitude and the growing public attention the incident was receiving. As he spoke, he noticed that more passengers had gathered around, and several were now openly criticizing the airline's treatment of him. "This is completely unacceptable," Colonel Hartwell said firmly. "Sergeant Major, you earned that Victoria Cross through extraordinary bravery and service to the Crown. His Majesty would be deeply disturbed to learn that you're being treated this way. Please hold your position. Do not board that aircraft under any circumstances until this matter is resolved." "Sir, I don't want to cause any trouble," James replied. "I can accept the economy seat if necessary." "Sergeant Major, this isn't about you causing trouble. This is about ensuring that those who have served with such distinction are treated with the respect they deserve. Please remain exactly where you are." The line went dead, and James found himself standing in the middle of the airport terminal, surrounded by increasingly agitated passengers and faced with airline staff who seemed determined to ignore the growing crisis they had created. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, Colonel Hartwell immediately picked up his secure phone and dialed a number that connected him directly to King Charles's private study. The king was reviewing documents related to upcoming state visits when his phone rang. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent situation that requires your immediate attention," Colonel Hartwell said. "What's happened?" King Charles asked, setting down his papers. "One of our Victoria Cross recipients, Sergeant Major James Richardson from the Coldstream Guards, is being publicly humiliated by an airline. They've downgraded him from business class to a middle seat in economy, apparently for no reason other than he doesn't fit their profile of an important passenger. The incident is being recorded, and there's a crowd of witnesses." King Charles was quiet for a moment, but Colonel Hartwell could sense the monarch's growing anger. "James Richardson, isn't he the soldier who rescued those 12 men in Afghanistan?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The same one. He was traveling to Edinburgh for a Victoria Cross recipient's ceremony." "This is absolutely disgraceful," King Charles said, his voice taking on an edge that his staff rarely heard. "What airline?" "British Airways, Your Majesty. Get me the CEO of British Airways on the phone immediately, and I want you to contact the airport manager as well. This ends now." Back at the airport, James watched as the situation continued to deteriorate. Mr. Davidson, the airline supervisor, was becoming increasingly defensive as more passengers joined the protest. The Scottish woman who had spoken earlier was now leading what appeared to be an impromptu boycott, encouraging other passengers to demand refunds for their tickets. "This is getting out of hand," Mr. Davidson muttered to Sarah. "Maybe we should just put him back in business class." "It's too late for that," said the businessman who had been upgraded earlier. "The damage is done. Everyone can see how you treat war heroes versus people like me who just have money." Sarah's phone rang, and she answered it with obvious relief, hoping for guidance from her superiors. However, her expression quickly changed from relief to confusion, then to outright panic. "What do you mean the CEO wants to speak to the passenger personally?" she whispered into the phone. "Which passenger? Oh no, yes, I understand." She hung up the phone and looked at Mr. Davidson with wide, frightened eyes. "That was head office. The CEO of British Airways is personally flying here to handle this situation. They said something about a call from Buckingham Palace." Mr. Davidson's face went white. "Buckingham Palace? What do you mean, Buckingham Palace?" Before Sarah could answer, James's phone rang again. It was Colonel Hartwell. "Sergeant Major Richardson, His Majesty has personally intervened in your situation. He has spoken directly with the CEO of British Airways, and I can assure you that this matter will be resolved immediately. However, His Majesty has requested that you remain at the airport for a few more minutes. There's something he would like to arrange. Sir, I really don't need any special treatment, James protested. I just want to get to Edinburgh for the ceremony. Sergeant Major, with all due respect, this is no longer about what you need or want. This is about sending a clear message about how this country treats its heroes. His Majesty has made his wishes very clear. Within 20 minutes, 3 black cars with tinted windows pulled up outside the airport terminal. Airport security cleared a path as several official-looking individuals in dark suits entered the building and walked directly toward the check-in area where James was still surrounded by supportive passengers. The lead figure, a tall man with graying hair and an unmistakable air of authority, approached Mr. Davidson and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I am Sir William Henderson, CEO of British Airways. I am here to personally apologize to Sergeant Major Richardson for the completely unacceptable treatment he has received from our staff today. The entire terminal area fell silent. Passengers stopped what they were doing to watch the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Mr. Davidson looked as though he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. Sir William turned to James and extended his hand. Sergeant Major Richardson, on behalf of British Airways and myself personally, I offer you my most sincere apologies. What happened here today is contrary to everything our company claims to stand for. James, maintaining his military composure despite the surreal nature of the situation, shook the CEO's hand. Sir, I appreciate your apology, but this really wasn't necessary. Sergeant Major, it was absolutely necessary, Sir William replied. A man who has served his country with such distinction should never be treated as you were today. But I'm afraid I have some additional news that might surprise you. Sir William gestured toward the airport entrance, where James could see additional black vehicles arriving. His Majesty King Charles has decided that you will not be flying commercial to Edinburgh today. The crowd gasped audibly as the full implications of what was happening began to sink in. James felt a mixture of embarrassment and amazement as he realized that his simple phone call had set in motion a chain of events that now involved the highest levels of the British establishment. Your Majesty has arranged for a Royal Air Force aircraft to transport you to Edinburgh in a manner befitting a Victoria Cross recipient, Sir William continued. Furthermore, he has personally requested that you delay your ceremony by 2 hours, as he wishes to attend and present you with an additional honor. The terminal erupted in applause as passengers realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. James stood in the middle of it all, wondering how a routine flight to Edinburgh had somehow become a moment that would change his life forever. But the biggest surprises were still to come. 2 hours later, James found himself aboard a Royal Air Force Voyager aircraft, the same type used to transport members of the royal family on official visits. The luxury and comfort were beyond anything he had ever experienced. But more importantly, he was being treated with the dignity and respect that had been so notably absent at the airport. Flight Lieutenant Sarah Collins, the aircraft commander, personally briefed James on the flight plan to Edinburgh. Sergeant Major, it's an honor to have you aboard. His Majesty specifically requested that we ensure you arrive relaxed and ready for what he described as a very special ceremony. As the aircraft climbed toward its cruising altitude, James reflected on the extraordinary events of the morning. He had expected to arrive in Edinburgh quietly, attend the ceremony with fellow Victoria Cross recipients, and return home the same evening. Instead, he was now at the center of what appeared to be a major royal intervention. His phone buzzed with a text message from his wife, Emma. James, it's all over the news. The video from the airport is everywhere. People are calling you a hero all over again. I'm so proud of you. See you tonight. Love, Emma. James hadn't realized that the airport incident had been broadcast beyond the small crowd that witnessed it. He pulled up the news on his phone and was shocked to see that the Royal Guard Downgraded was trending on social media. The video showed the entire confrontation, and public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of him and critical of the airline. Upon landing in Edinburgh, James was met by a Royal Navy Honor Guard and transported in an official state car to Edinburgh Castle, where the Victoria Cross ceremony was being held. However, as they approached the castle, James noticed something unusual. The normally modest gathering for such ceremonies had been transformed into something much larger. Hundreds of people lined the streets leading to the castle, many holding signs supporting veterans and military personnel. Scottish bagpipers played in the distance, and news crews from major television networks had set up equipment around the castle entrance. Colonel MacLeod, the ceremony coordinator, met James at the car. "Sergeant Major, I must warn you that today's ceremony has become significantly larger than originally planned. His Majesty's decision to attend has drawn considerable attention, but there's more to it than that." As they walked toward the castle, Colonel MacLeod explained that King Charles had not simply decided to attend the existing ceremony. Instead, he had ordered it to be completely transformed into what he called a proper recognition of extraordinary service. Inside the castle's great hall, James was amazed to see that the modest ceremony for 12 Victoria Cross recipients had become a grand state occasion. Over 500 guests filled the hall, including government ministers, military leaders, and representatives from veteran organizations across the United Kingdom. But the biggest surprise came when Colonel MacLeod led him to a private room where King Charles was waiting, dressed in his full military uniform as Colonel-in-Chief of the Coldstream Guards. "Sergeant Major Richardson," King Charles said, approaching with a warm smile. "I owe you an apology." James immediately snapped to attention. "Your Majesty, you owe me nothing. I'm deeply honored by everything you've arranged." "James, may I call you James? What happened to you today should never happen to anyone who has served our nation with such courage. But more than that, it made me realize that we as a nation haven't done enough to recognize and honor the sacrifices made by people like you." King Charles gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit. I want to explain what I've decided to do." As they sat together, King Charles outlined a comprehensive plan that went far beyond addressing the morning's airport incident. He had decided to use James's experience as a catalyst for broader changes in how the United Kingdom honors and treats its veterans. "Effective immediately," King Charles explained, "I am establishing the Royal Veterans Recognition Program. This will ensure that Victoria Cross recipients and other highly decorated veterans receive priority treatment on all British carriers, priority access to government services, and most importantly, a clear message that their service is valued and remembered." James was speechless. "Your Majesty, I never intended for any of this." "James, sometimes extraordinary events begin with ordinary incidents. What happened to you today was wrong, but your dignity and grace in handling it has inspired something much larger." King Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking Edinburgh Castle's courtyard. "But that's not all. I've also decided to establish an annual $10 million fund to support veterans facing financial difficulties, healthcare challenges, or housing problems. It will be called the Richardson Veterans Support Fund." "Your Majesty, you cannot name it after me," James protested. "It will remind everyone that behind every Victoria Cross is a person who deserves our respect and support, not just on the day they receive their medal, but every day thereafter." 20 minutes later, James walked into the Great Hall, where the ceremony was about to begin. As he entered, the entire assembly rose to their feet in sustained applause. Among the audience, he could see his wife Emma, who had been flown to Edinburgh by royal arrangement, wiping tears from her eyes. King Charles took the podium and addressed the gathering with words that would be quoted in newspapers around the world the following day. "Today began with an incident that shamed us as a nation," King Charles declared. "A man who had risked his life to save others was treated as though his service meant nothing. But Sergeant Major James Richardson's response to that treatment has reminded us all of what true dignity looks like." The king went on to announce the Royal Veterans Recognition Program and the Richardson Veterans Support Fund to thunderous applause. But his next words left everyone in the hall completely stunned. Furthermore, in recognition of his continued exemplary service and his representation of the finest values of our armed forces, I am pleased to announce that Sergeant Major James Richardson has been appointed to the Most Noble Order of the Garter, making him Sir James Richardson, Knight Companion of the Garter. The great hall erupted in the loudest ovation any of the attendees had ever witnessed. The Order of the Garter, established in 1348, is the oldest and most senior order of chivalry in Britain, limited to just 24 living members, plus members of the royal family. James stood in shock as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He was not just being honored for his military service. He was being elevated to one of the highest positions in the British honors system, joining a company that included former prime ministers, distinguished generals, and members of European royal families. As King Charles placed the Garter insignia around James's neck, he whispered, "This is what happens when someone tries to diminish a man of your caliber, James. Sometimes the response must be so significant that it ensures such treatment never happens again." The ceremony concluded with the entire assembly singing, "God Save the King," while James stood beside the monarch, still processing the extraordinary transformation his life had undergone in a single day. Later that evening, as James and Emma flew back to London aboard the royal aircraft, he received a call from Sir William Henderson, the British Airways CEO. "Sir James," Sir William said, using his new title, "I wanted you to know that the staff members involved in this morning's incident have been dismissed, and we are implementing comprehensive training programs to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Additionally, British Airways will be the first carrier to implement His Majesty's new Veterans Recognition Program." The impact of the day's events continued to reverberate for weeks afterward. The video of James's airport treatment was viewed millions of times, sparking a national conversation about how society treats its veterans. The hashtag #TreatVeteransRight became a rallying cry for improved services and recognition for military personnel. 3 months later, James received a letter from a young soldier serving in Afghanistan. "Sir James," it read, "what happened to you and how you handled it has inspired all of us out here. We know that when we come home, there are people who will stand up for us. Thank you for showing us what dignity looks like." As James folded the letter and placed it carefully in his desk drawer, next to his Victoria Cross and his new Garter insignia, he reflected on how a simple flight to Edinburgh had become a defining moment not just for him, but for veteran recognition across the entire United Kingdom. The airline incident that began the day had been forgotten by most people, overshadowed by the extraordinary royal response that followed. But for James, the real victory wasn't in the honors or recognition he had received. It was in knowing that future veterans would be treated with the respect and dignity they had earned through their service. King Charles's response had indeed left everyone stunned, but more importantly, it had created lasting change that would benefit military personnel for generations to come. What started as one man's quiet dignity in facing discrimination had become a transformation in how an entire nation honored its heroes.